Okay, so I'm finally excited to introduce to you all our guest speaker, Laura Wagner, the EV Battery Sustainability and Recycling Manager at General Motors. So Laura is developing strategies for circularity, recycling, carbon footprint, and tracking of batteries throughout the life cycle. She spent her early career in purchasing and holds two patents in supply chain solutions. She brings over 20 years of nonprofit board experience, including executive positions, and is currently on the advisory board of the Battery Show and a member of the executive board at NatBat. Laura holds a bachelor's in chemical engineering and an MBA from Washington University, as well as a master's in manufacturing and environmental science. And I'm really excited to talk to her about her university journey and education journey. So please join me in welcoming Laura as she shares her insights from her incredible career and her vision for the future of EV and batteries. Welcome, Laura. Thank you for being here. So
Thank you
how
for
are
having
you?
me. I'm good.
What's your state of charge?
I'm going to say 80% because that's like an ideal state, I think. Ready to go.
Perfect. Hopefully improved from the Monday. All right. So, to start off, can you take us through your journey in battery sustainability and end of life management, and maybe discuss a little bit about what life cycle management entails and what does GM focus on in that aspect?
Sure. Well, my journey, I guess, starts in college with deciding to study chemical engineering and continuing on to get an MBA before entering the workforce, which was probably driven by the market. The oil market fell apart while I was getting my engineering degree, and then the financial markets fell apart while I was getting my MBA. But I really enjoyed the operations classes that I took in graduate school, and I wanted to enter the manufacturing sector. And I ended up finding a job at Ford Motor Company in purchasing. Within a couple years, I decided to get a master's in manufacturing while working full time. And I was able to do so partly because I lived, worked, and went to school within a couple of miles. And I like to joke that I didn't leave town for 3 years. And I also had my first child near the end of that time. But once I had that master's in manufacturing engineering, I pivoted within purchasing to a role working with suppliers on their plants, making them more efficient through lean manufacturing. And it was probably the most fun job that I've had. I traveled quite a bit, but I was in charge of my schedule, so that worked out. And it was in that job that I moved into my first management role. But I also had to do the same work as my engineers on top of that. So that was another kind of challenge. Um, After about 5 years, um, I had my third child, and I stopped traveling. So I had to leave that manufacturing job behind. But I worked in purchasing program management for a while, and then I moved back into buying. And I, at one point, oversaw all of the restraints purchasing for the company, and I became well versed in safety issues. When my youngest was starting high school, I decided to pursue another master's degree, this time in environmental science. And I found the many subjects fascinating, and I took a couple of field geology classes that involved traveling, first to Iceland and then to Puerto Rico. And as my coursework wound down, I started looking around the company for a job where sustainability was a focus. And I ended up working in EV battery lifecycle management, developing strategies and working on small pilot projects, such as one where we tracked batteries using blockchain.
Mm.
But a few years into this job, I saw the opportunity at General Motors to work on a bigger team and focused on battery lifecycle management. And I took the leap to change companies.
Wonderful. That's quite a journey. Can you tell us a little bit more about how you decided to move from purchasing into batteries? Can you describe the transition and how your experience in purchasing has helped you in this new field?
Yeah, that's a great question. At first, I looked at the really long list of requirements for the job in battery lifecycle management, and I found it a bit overwhelming. one requirement in particular seemed impossible, which was to have 3 to 5 years of experience working in a battery factory. And this was in 2018. So I eventually realized that they weren't going to find anybody with that because um, there just weren't a lot of battery manufacturers around that had been around for 5 years longer than that. So when I thought about all the jobs I did in purchasing and how um, each one, I had to learn a new industry and understand how things were made and what drove costs. And I also had those years in lean manufacturing. And well, in fact, I had a degree in manufacturing. So I realized that I probably was the most qualified person in the company for the job, even though I didn't really feel like I like it. But I was able to turn that around and tell my stories to support the interview questions and win the role.
Yeah, that's wonderful. I think women, a lot more than men, are apprehensive for applying to jobs where they feel like they don't meet all the qualifications. And I think your journey highlights an example about how you don't need to meet all the criteria to be the right person for the job.
Yeah.
Uh,
So you had
so,
earlier
mhm,
asked me about what life cycle management entails and what we
mhm,
focus on. So um, it's mostly focused on the fate of batteries when they come out of the vehicle. We do work through the whole life cycle, but most of the early life of a battery is well defined as part of the business of designing, building, and making vehicles. And in that area, our work is more about education, consultation, and advice. So we're the experts on the batteries as far as the life cycle goes. So we provide that information. But
mhm,
some of the people on the team work on remanufacturing strategies. So we want to make sure that the batteries are used in the vehicle as long as possible. If they can be repaired or remanufactured and put back into a vehicle, that's the highest best use for that battery. We also do some work on design for repair, remanufacturing, and recycling. So that's
mhm,
part of that feeding back of information to the design process. And we consider business cases for other uses of the battery, and we look to enable proper recycling at true end of life. So then the final step is working closely with cell and cathode suppliers to find a way to
mhm,
reintroduce recycled battery material into the supply chain so we can close the loop.
mhm. Yeah, so maybe we can dive a little bit deeper into this area. Maybe you can chat about some challenges that you see, particularly regarding, end of life batteries and regulatory aspects like the battery passport.
Yeah, sure. Um, so one of the biggest challenges in working in end of life is just the availability of batteries. um, we're trying to enable the circularity for EV batteries by remanufacturing them and making sure they get recycled at end of life. But right now, there's not a lot of batteries. Um, so when we work on that and work on trying to close the loop, um, there's not a lot of batteries to actually work with. And I sometimes feel like I'm working 25 years into the future, trying to figure out when those batteries come to life, come to end of life in great quantities. Is there going to be a process in place that will handle them properly? And the battery passport, if we have to build one, which I think we do, it's going to be a requirement in Europe, then I like to see that it's the same in all markets and not unique
Mhm,
in every state, province, or country. Um, it seems to be that it'll be on the backs of the automotive companies to build it. But
mhm,
once it is set up and it's fed automatically with data, which is a big hurdle, it has a lot of potential to maximize battery value by minimizing wasted materials, wasted energy, wasted transportation throughout the life of the battery.
mhm. So you think the battery passport, even though it's a European initiative, will affect all markets across the globe?
Yes, I think in China they have their own version of it already in place for like the
Mhm,
last 6 years. Um, the US probably won't regulate that we have one, but there is a lot of talk about um, if we have one, voluntary or otherwise, what should it look like? So there's a lot of that discussion going on right now with the DOE.
Hmm. Yeah, that's really interesting. Now, going back to your journey, what really stood out to me is how much education you've received, and not only before you took up, your job at Ford, but also throughout your career. So, can you talk a little bit about the role that education has played in your life and how you've managed it alongside, such a big growing family?
Yeah, I like to say, life is a patchwork. You don't have to be Wonder Woman and do everything all at the same time. And also, I'm a big proponent for letting curiosity lead me where I'm going to go. I'm a lifelong learner, to be sure. I don't think I'll get another degree, but I'll never say never. Um, for me, I was motivated by the learning as well as the diploma. I didn't pursue the degrees in order to get a specific job. Instead,
Mhm,
I found that that formal education fed my interests, and the next job assignment grew organically from there. It also helped that Ford paid for one and a half of those degrees, so made it easier. Um, as for family, as I mentioned, I came to the workforce with 2 degrees, and I had my first child towards the end of the third degree. And I'm not going to lie, working full time and going to school while pregnant and then with a newborn for another 10 months was grueling. But there was an end in sight, so I just stuck to it. And then I waited 20 years to go back to school again once my kids were in high school and college. So self-sufficient.
Well, that's incredible that you've been able to achieve all that. And I think it shows everyone here that your educational journey doesn't have to end, when you find a job or when you start to have a family, and that, you know, you can do it all, like Laura shows.
Just not all at once.
Yeah, not all at once. But life is long enough that you can try so many different things.
Yep, for sure.
So since you moved from purchasing into batteries, a question for you. Do you think that you need a technical background or a lot of technical experience to move into such a technical job?
Um, well, there are many jobs in batteries, and some of them do require a technical background. But if you have interest and skills in things like sales or program management, accounting, logistics, purchasing, sustainability, or any number of other fields, you can do all of those in the battery industry. Um,
Mhm.
so it depends on how deeply involved you want to be with batteries. And then there's always ways to learn about what you need to learn about batteries once you're in the industry.
Hmm. Yeah, and I think your experience in purchasing really helped you with your new role in life cycle management and recycling.
Yeah, for sure.
All right, now I want to dive a little bit deeper into what it's like being a woman in the battery industry. So, can you tell us a little bit about what it has been like and what challenges you faced, especially early in your career?
Sure. Well, yeah, early in my career, I wasn't in batteries. That really wasn't a thing. But I was in an organization that was roughly half men and half women. So that actually helped. It was much more of an even playing field. But in many meetings with programs or with engineering, I was the only woman in the room. I mean, as a young woman, that was quite a shock at first. Um, and then sometimes I was asked to do work because I was a woman. Like I was asked by my director one time in a meeting to take dictation. Um, and I looked at him and I said, I don't know dictation, but if you speak slowly, I'll write your response out. And that was enough for him to realize that it was inappropriate request to look to me as the only woman and assume I knew how to take dictation, which probably isn't even a thing anymore, but it was back then. Um, I also spent some meetings in a local vehicle plant, and I was uncomfortable with the unwanted attention I got walking through the plant in a skirt suit, which was the dress code requirement at the time. It didn't matter if I was going to visit a plant, I couldn't put jeans on, I had to wear a skirt. Um, and I did let that prevent me from taking an assignment in manufacturing because I was told it was a one-way move out of purchasing and I wasn't comfortable with a permanent change to a work environment that included harassment. So that was a loss for them and a somewhat of a loss for me. They did want women professionals in manufacturing roles, and they wanted to recruit them from areas of the company that already had more women. And instead of fixing their work environment to be more appealing to, recruiting women. Um, of course, over time, things have gotten a lot better, and I've gotten a lot more confident. In my lean manufacturing role, I saw the insides of hundreds of manufacturing plants, and I spent time with the men and women who do the difficult work on the plant floor. And I found that being a guest and an expert usually meant that I was treated with respect.
Hmm. No, that's incredible, the challenges you face. But yeah, I think all of us can learn that we just need to be confident and keep going. But yeah, I'm glad that things have changed. That sounds pretty brutal. And throughout your career, how have coworkers and managers influenced your development?
So your managers and your coworkers will make or break you because you spend more time with them than you do with your own family and friends. Um, a bad manager is the number one reason that people quit their jobs. So
Mhm.
that's something people should keep in mind. But I've had all kinds of managers, the good, the bad, and the ugly. And I realized years ago that I could learn from all of them. So I needed to see their strengths and weaknesses and learn from both. I also learned to seek out other managers and ask for their feedback, especially when I didn't get an assignment or a promotion that I worked hard for. I didn't always like what I heard, but I always try to listen attentively and gratefully and to learn what I can do differently next time. I might not agree with them, but I always thank people for giving me feedback because people tend to just tell you what you want to hear. So if they actually tell you something negative, it's actually something that you should be grateful to hear and process. As
Mhm.
for coworkers, the best coworker I would say be the best coworker you can be, and you'll end up with the best coworkers. Be helpful and gracious with your time and knowledge. Be collaborative and find the value in helping each other out, especially if you're in different organizations. It'll make your days go by faster, and you never know that intern you helped out on the first day in the office could one day be your boss. I've seen that happen.
No, that's wonderful. And I had a question about, you switched into different departments. Did you at first do specific little projects within different departments to get a taste of how that's like, or did you, look at the job description and decide, okay, that's, going to be my job, new job full time?
So when I started at Ford, they did not really sanction moving from department to department,
Mm,
from one organization to another. So in the end, I tried to do that. I was an engineer, which was, most people in purchasing are not or were not, and I really got nowhere trying to get a temporary assignment in another organization. But what I found was that within purchasing, there were lots of different types of jobs. That lean manufacturing job is an example. I also
mhm,
worked doing internal auditing for purchasing as a temporary job. And I did program management, I did regular buying and managing of purchase of buyers. And I was able to do all those things within my organization. I'd say in a really big company, there's a lot of opportunities, but it can be sometimes hard to get some traction to get moving into another organization.
mhm,
But if you work in a small company, you probably wear lots of hats and already get lots
mhm.
of opportunities to do more than you bargained for as far as different types of roles.
Yeah, there are definitely pros and cons to both large and small companies. But that's why I found it so incredible that you were able to hold so many diverse positions when you're in such a large organization that's usually pretty segmented.
Yeah, I will say if you want to change careers and companies, it's best to take that in a two-step approach. So, for example, it was a lot easier for me to get this role within Ford than to go from purchasing at Ford to battery lifecycle management at GM. I just didn't have the credibility to do that. So first I switched kind of careers and then I switched companies.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense to gain that experience. All right, so before we go into questions from the audience, do you have any final advice to the women in the room looking to succeed in our, fast evolving and changing industry?
Sure. I would say be flexible and adaptable. Things are changing pretty fast, so stay curious and follow your interests. If you hate your job, you're going to be miserable. So find the things that you enjoy in your job and try to make a career out of that. Stay informed, whether that's through reading or classes or even degrees, or on the job training or going to conferences. Um, Stay informed and be willing to share your knowledge inside and outside of your company. And don't be afraid to tout your successes on LinkedIn. So that's one way to improve your visibility. And if you don't find things the way you like them at your current company, you can become well known in the industry pretty quickly because it is such a small industry still.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you. That's incredible advice. And thank you for such an insightful discussion. So really quick, before Q&A, I'd like to do a lightning round where we get to know you a little bit more. So I'm going to ask you a few questions and you give me super quick answers. So Laura, do EV batteries end up in landfills?
No, they do not. They're too big. They don't accidentally end up in the landfill the way consumer batteries do.
Do you have any book recommendations for us?
I thought of a couple. We're in a big transition from oil to batteries. So, and I like reading books by journalists because I think they pack a lot of information in a nice storytelling way. But one is called The New Map: Energy, Climate, and the Clash of Nations by Daniel Yergin. And that's the history of oil, how we got where we are today. And it'll give you a sense of the huge financial hurdles that have to be overcome to move away from big oil.
Mhm.
And then more recently, a book called The War Below: Lithium, Copper, and the Global Battle for Power to Power Our Lives by Ernest Shader. And that'll give you a great background in the challenges of getting enough materials out of the ground to transition the world away from oil
Mhm.
and eventually to a time when recycling becomes the main source of minerals. But in general, I try to find books that fill my own gaps in knowledge. So I would just say be curious, and there's a lot of books out there.
Wonderful. Thank you. If you could change one thing about battery regulations, what would it be?
Harmonization. We have such a patchwork of regulations with more coming every day. It's like every politician out there wants to introduce a battery bill. It's a challenge for the industry. We need, as an industry, to come up with our own standards and processes and solutions that will help guide common sense regulations across the states, provinces, and nations so that we don't have that patchwork.
Yeah, it's an issue of an early new industry, but I believe in us.
I do too.
All right, final question. If you were a battery cell, what special performance attribute would you have?
Well, it's tempting to say cycle life, but I'm going to go with energy density. Pack a punch.
Pack a punch. I love it. Well, thank you so much, Laura. That was great. So